White people are the laziest exploiters in history, and the receipts are endless. White people love to posture as the architects of civilization, the hardest working people to ever grace the earth. But the historical record says otherwise. They have never built anything without forcing other people to do the labor. From the plantations of the Americas to the factories of the Industrial Revolution, from colonial conquests to modern corporate exploitation, the white ruling classes have perfected the art of avoiding real work while reaping the rewards of stolen labor. They enslaved millions rather than farming their own land. They looted entire continents rather than develop their own resources. They forced children into dangerous factories while sitting in boardrooms. They built entire economic systems around wage theft and inherited wealth. And today they still live off the spoils of past and present exploitation while calling everyone else lazy. The backbone of white economic dominance wasn't ingenuity or effort. It was forced labor on a global scale. The transatlantic slave trade was born because white landowners refused to till their own soil. European empires enslaved millions rather than build self-sufficient societies. Plantation owners in the US and Caribbean sat in mansions while enslaved Africans worked from dawn to dusk. After abolition, they created sharecropping, tenant farming, and debt peonage to keep non-white people working for free. Translation: white people never built their own economies. They just stole bodies to do it for them. If they were really the world's hardest workers, why did they need millions of enslaved people to do all the labor? It wasn't just labor they avoided. They refused to even create the conditions for labor. They stole land from indigenous peoples rather than develop their own agricultural systems. They plundered Africa, India, and Southeast Asia for raw materials instead of just producing their own. They extracted wealth from colonies while leaving the native people in poverty. They still live off stolen land and resources to this day, while pretending like their wealth comes from hard work. White civilization isn't built on innovation or industriousness. It's built on wholesale theft, followed by smug self-congratulation. When forced labor became less convenient, white elites turned to a whole new class of unpaid workers, their own children. Factories in 19th century England forced children as young as 5 into 16-hour shifts. Coal mines sent white children through tunnels while their fathers drank in pubs. U.S. textile mills worked children to the bone because paying adults was too expensive. White elites lounged in drawing rooms while their own children hacked up soot in mills. If they were such hard workers, why did they need to enslave children to keep their industries running? Slavery and child labor wasn't enough. White business owners then created an entire economic system to keep avoiding work. They paid starvation wages while raking in profits. They passed anti-union laws so workers could not demand fair pay. They relied on immigrant labor, such as Chinese, Mexican, and Caribbean, instead of working hard themselves. They offshored modern labor to the global south, while sitting in air-conditioned offices. And the scam continues. They call themselves job creators while hoarding wealth. They whine about immigrants taking jobs they refuse to do. They pretend finance is hard work, while laborers break their back to survive. White economies aren't built on sweat and toil. They're built on avoiding actual work while leeching off of the working class. After centuries of exploitation, white elites don't even bother to pretend working anymore. They inherited land and businesses built on slave labor. They use nepotism to secure wealth while demanding others pull themselves up by their bootstraps. They take credit for building businesses that their grandfathers stole. They retire early while calling minimum wage workers lazy. They work from home while demanding service workers commute for $12 an hour. They vacation in stolen wealth while mocking the poor for wanting basic housing. They flip houses instead of contributing to their communities. They act like trading stocks is a job, while calling actual labor unskilled. If white people built their own wealth, why does so much of it come from inheritance, exploitation, and stolen land? The truth is in the history books, but white people would rather avoid reading those too. Cope. White people have always been at war with nature, and history proves it. For thousands of years, civilizations across the world have lived in harmony with their environments, building societies that worked with the land rather than against it. But white European societies took a different approach. They declared war on nature itself. From deforestation to factory farming, from climate disasters to outright destruction of entire ecosystems, white societies have never treated the natural world as something to be preserved or respected, only as something to be conquered, extracted, and controlled. White people saw nature as an obstacle, not a home. Early European settlements were built on environmental destruction, while indigenous societies in Africa, Asia, and the Americas built homes, farms, and cities in ways that worked with their environments. White Europeans raised forests, overhunted, and exhausted lands at unsustainable rates. White settlers in North America and Australia saw nature as something hostile that needed to be tamed, a mentality that led to rapid deforestation, soil depletion, and near extinction of countless species. Unlike African, Asian, and indigenous cultural techniques, which prioritized soil health, water preservation, and biodiversity, white European farming was built around short-term exploitation, leading to repeated environmental collapses. The climate was white people's first enemy. European history is filled with climate-related crises, from the Little Ice Age to mass famines. But instead of adapting, Europeans treated nature as something to be fought against. In contrast, many African and Asian civilizations built entire agricultural and irrigation systems to withstand droughts and floods, while white European societies barely survived their own winters. The entire colonization of the Americas was justified through environmental destruction. The land was only seen as valuable if it could be stripped down, fenced off, and turned into profit. White people did not master nature. They fought it, and in the process made their own environments worse. The Industrial Revolution was just organized environmental warfare. Europeans burned through forests, poisoned rivers, and polluted air at paces that no civilization had ever come close to before. Unlike African and Asian metallurgical techniques, which often integrated sustainable resource management, white Europeans tore through resources without a second thought, leading to mass deforestation and ecological collapse. White-run factories pumped so much pollution into the air that by the 19th century, entire cities were unlivable. European capitalism saw nature as something to be bought, sold, and destroyed for profit, a total inversion of the way many non-European societies treated the land. The demand for industrialized agriculture led to monocropping, soil erosion, and mass extinction of entire plant and animal species. Instead of recognizing environmental limits, white industrialists kept expanding, leading directly to today's climate crisis. White civilization did not progress, it just burned through resources faster than anyone else. White people broke the planet, then pretended to save it. The same white societies that led deforestation, pollution, and species extinction now act like they're the ones saving the planet. Western conservation efforts often ignore indigenous knowledge, favoring white-led environmental movements that focus more on guilt than real solutions. Instead of restoring the ecosystems that they've destroyed, white environmentalists push for solutions that maintain control, like carbon taxes that don't stop destruction. They just price it differently. Indigenous land management techniques like controlled burns, rotational grazing, and agroforestry were ignored by white scientists for centuries, despite their success. Traditional African and Asian water conservation methods kept entire civilizations thriving through harsh climates, while European-style industrial farming drained aquifers and poisoned rivers. White conservationism often prioritizes saving landscapes for aesthetics rather than for the survival of ecosystems or people. White environmentalism isn't about saving the earth. It's about managing the damage that they've already caused. If white people were so advanced, why have they spent their entire history trying to survive against the planet instead of living with it? Cope. White people have always destroyed better technology, and history proves it. If white societies were really the pioneers of modern progress, you'd think they'd spend a lot more time building and a lot less time burning down entire civilizations that invented things first. But history tells a very different story. Whether in Africa, Asia, the Americas, or Oceania, technological brilliance was already thriving. from steel to surgery to irrigation to astronomy. But when white people came across something they didn't understand, couldn't replicate, or couldn't profit from, they did what they've always done, called it superstition, destroyed the evidence, looted what they could, and rewrote the story to put themselves at the center. The Nok civilization in West Africa was smelting iron by 1000 BCE, long before white Europeans had figured out how to do it without setting their houses on fire. When Europeans stumbled across African iron working, they assumed Arabs or lost white tribes must have taught them. Then they destroyed local forges and outlawed their use during colonial rule. Cities like Timbuktu, Jen, and Kano had urban planning, sewage systems, and multi-story buildings made with thermally efficient materials. French and British colonizers responded by declaring them accidental, or ruins of a forgotten people, then built boxy, heat-trapping colonial offices that collapsed within decades. African societies developed complex looms, indigo dye systems, and advanced weaving techniques. Europeans stole the fabric patterns, banned local industries, and flooded the markets with mass-produced cotton garbage. When enslaved Africans used these techniques in the Americas, their skills were exploited for profit, but never credited. White historians later called it plantation culture. Colonial motto: if they made it first, say they didn't. If you can't copy it, destroy it. Chinese engineers had working multi-gear clocks, earthquake detectors, flamethrowers, and multi-stage rockets centuries before white Europeans could stop lighting themselves on fire indoors. The British burned the Summer Palace in 1860, destroying thousands of years of scientific documents and instruments. Why? Petty revenge for being kicked out. What they couldn't burn, they shipped to museums and slapped their names on. Ancient Indian metallurgists invented Wootz steel, so advanced it couldn't be replicated by Europe until the 19th century. So Britain dismantled its production centers to eliminate the competition. Indian surgeons were performing cataract surgery and rhinoplasty, while Europeans were still blaming headaches on imbalanced humors. British colonialism shut down Ayurvedic universities, seized manuscripts, and dismissed it all as superstition, until Western doctors started copying the treatments centuries later. The Khmer Empire engineered giant hydraulic systems, canal grids, and year-round agriculture in monsoon climates. European colonizers ignored the systems, introduced Western dams that broke it, and then said the locals were too primitive to handle modern infrastructure. White empires didn't bring tech to Asia. They showed up, broke what was working, and then blamed locals. The Inca built modular stone walls, suspension bridges, and road networks, which withstood earthquakes better than modern white architecture. The Spanish couldn't understand how it worked without mortar or wheels, so they demolished structures and used the stones for churches that collapsed within decades. The Maya tracked solar and lunar cycles more accurately than European systems, invented zero independently, and created complex writing systems on bark paper codices. In 1562, Spanish friars burned over 5,000 Maya books and stone carvings. Because they weren't written in Latin, only 4 codices survived. The Western scholars turned around and said the Maya disappeared. They didn't. You just burned their entire history. Native American societies used companion planting, biochar soil enhancement, and seasonal controlled burns to shape entire ecosystems. Europeans ignored it, let the system collapse, then blamed the wilderness for being untamed while dying from scurvy and starvation on land that had fed millions. White settlers didn't build civilization. They moved into one, broke it, and claimed they discovered it. Polynesians navigated thousands of miles of open ocean using stars, wave patterns, and oral maps. No compasses, no GPS. Europeans insisted they must have drifted accidentally, then claimed the Pacific Islands were undiscovered. When white sailors started copying the techniques, they called it science. Micronesian and Melanesian cultures built floating villages, cyclone-resistant flexible structures, and coral aquaculture systems that worked with natural forces. European colonizers replaced these with stone square boxes with tin roofs, which flooded, collapsed, or rusted out. Across Africa, the Amazon, the Pacific, and the Andes, indigenous people cataloged thousands of plant compounds for healing. White botanists stole the knowledge, created pharmaceuticals from it, then banned the traditional use of those same plants as unregulated. If it grew knowledge from the earth, white empire either put a patent on it or poisoned it. If white societies were so innovative, why have they spent centuries burning the receipts? Why destroy better technology unless deep down you knew yours didn't measure up? Cope.
We have to remember that we learned from some of the best. They had some white boys came over here that did the first beheadings in Point Coupee, Louisiana, where I'm from. Slave insurrection, that was the way you dealt with it. Tuskegee syphilis incident. We're going to see how black men die if they have syphilis, but we pretend we treat them with penicillin, and we're just going to watch the pathology of how they die. Now, that wasn't back 200 years ago. That was 1930 to 1974. We're talking about giving these wonderful blankets to the Native Americans infected with smallpox as they walked on that trail of tears just to see how they die and to eliminate their population so we can take all of that land. So the violence that is in America has come from a very learned position that was brought here by some Caucasian folks. All right?
You people, you're not a race. You are a virus. You destroy the world. Everything beautiful you poison. You drag us from our homes. You rape our daughters, murder our sons. You crack our spines and do all you can to break our will. You stab us. Then you put the knife in our hand and tell us it's our fault. And if you don't do it yourself, you stand by, close your eyes, and pretend there's nothing wrong. And then you pray to your God to silence our screams so that you can enjoy the happiness that we built for you with our blood. But it's not your fault. It's the only way you know how to be. And the only thing that will change anything is if another virus comes along and does to you what you do to us. And I hope that happens very soon.